The gate rattled hard enough to wake Marin Colt from a shallow sleep, and her heart jumped before her mind even caught up. Rain hammered the tin roof of her small farmhouse, and lightning cracked somewhere close enough that the windows lit up white for half a second. She sat up in bed, listening. The gate rattled again, and this time she heard something else underneath the wind, a low sound, almost like breathing, almost like pain. She grabbed a coat from the hook by her door and stepped into her boots without lacing them. Her hands were already shaking, not from cold, but from the strange certainty that something out there needed her, right now, before she could think of a reason to stay inside where it was safe. The porch light flickered as she pushed the door open, and the wind hit her like a wall. For a moment, she saw nothing but sheets of rain and the dark shape of the old oak tree bending at the edge of her land. Then she saw them. 2 enormous dogs lay crumpled against the iron gate, their fur soaked flat against ribs she could count from 10 feet away. One of them lifted its head when the porch light caught its eyes, and those eyes were not the eyes of an ordinary dog. They were pale gold, almost glowing, and they looked at her with an intelligence that made her stop walking for a second. She should have been afraid. Later, she would try to explain to herself why she wasn't, and she never found a good answer. She only knew that something in her chest told her to keep moving, so she did. "Hey there," she said quietly, the way she used to talk to spooked horses when she was a girl. "Hey now, it's all right." The larger of the 2 dogs let out a sound that was not quite a growl and not quite a whimper. Marin crouched down a few feet away, letting the rain soak through her coat, and waited. The dog's ribs rose and fell in short, shallow breaths. Its companion, slightly smaller but just as thin, pressed close against its side, as if trying to keep it warm, or maybe trying to keep itself from disappearing into the storm. Neither dog answered, of course, but something about the way they held themselves told her the wounds were not new. These animals had been running for a long time, maybe days, maybe longer. Their pads were cracked. Their coats, beneath the mud and rain, held the ghost of a shine that spoke of once being cared for, brushed, loved. Marin made a decision in that moment that would change the next several months of her life, though she had no way of knowing that yet. She stood, walked back into the house, and returned with 2 thick towels and a bowl of water. She did not try to touch them right away. She simply set the bowl down, backed off a few steps, and waited. It took nearly 20 minutes before the smaller dog dragged itself forward and drank. The larger one watched Marin the entire time, unmoving, as if standing guard, even while half dead from exhaustion. When it finally allowed itself to drink, it did so without ever fully looking away from her, like trust was a debt it wasn't ready to pay in full. By morning, both dogs were curled together on a bed of old blankets in her barn, and Marin had not slept another minute. She sat on an overturned bucket nearby, watching the rise and fall of their breathing, feeling an exhaustion that was strangely peaceful. Whatever these animals were, wherever they had come from, she felt certain of one thing: they were not going to be easy to forget. The storm broke by midday, and pale sunlight spilled through the cracks in the barn's wooden walls. Marin used the quiet hours to check the dogs more carefully. There were scars along their flanks, old ones, healed over, the kind that came from something more organized than a simple accident. There was also a collar on the larger dog, though the tag had been torn away, leaving only a small brass ring and a few scratched letters that meant nothing on their own. She brought food, simple things at first, warm broth and soft bread soaked in milk, since she worried their stomachs couldn't handle more. The larger dog refused to eat until the smaller one had taken its share, and only then did it allow itself to lower its head to the bowl. Marin found herself oddly moved by this. Whoever trained these animals, whoever raised them, had built something rare between them, a loyalty that ran deeper than hunger. She decided to call the larger one Ash, for the gray patches along its back that reminded her of dying embers, and the smaller one Rook, for the way it watched everything with sharp, careful eyes, like a bird sizing up danger from a high branch. Neither dog objected to the names, though she supposed they wouldn't have objected to anything at that point. Word travels fast in small places, and Marin's little corner of the countryside was no exception. By the second day, her neighbor, an older man named Edwin Marsh who lived down the winding lane with his chickens and his suspicious opinions, came by under the pretense of borrowing a tool he did not need. "Heard you took in some strays," he said, leaning against her fence, eyes drifting toward the barn. "They're not strays," Marin said, surprising herself with how quickly she defended them. "They're hurt. I'm just helping them heal. Edwin's eyes narrowed slightly. Big dogs like that don't wander in from nowhere, Marin. Somebody bred those two. Somebody trained them. You sure you want to be the one holding on to another man's property? The word property struck her strangely, though she couldn't say why at the time. She simply shrugged and told him she'd worry about that if anyone ever came asking. Edwin left without his tool, muttering something about her being too soft-hearted for her own good, and Marin almost laughed, because she'd heard that same complaint from nearly everyone in her life who claimed to care about her. Over the following days, Ash and Rook grew stronger, with a speed that almost startled her. By the fourth morning, Ash was standing on his own, testing his weight carefully, his golden eyes following Marin's every movement around the barn. By the sixth, both dogs were walking the length of her small pasture, noses low, ears constantly turning toward every distant sound, as if danger might arrive from any direction at any moment. Marin noticed something else too. The dogs never wandered far from her. Even when she worked in the garden, weeding rows of vegetables in the weak autumn sun, Ash would station himself at the edge of the field, watching the road, while Rook stayed close enough to brush against her leg every few minutes, checking, reassuring itself she was still there. She had lived alone for 3 years, ever since her small marriage had quietly ended, and she'd traded a cramped apartment in town for this modest patch of land her grandmother had left her. She had grown used to silence, used to the particular ache of an empty house that never quite left, no matter how many books she read or shows she watched to fill the evenings. She had not realized how heavy that silence had become until it was interrupted by the soft click of claws on wooden floors, the warm weight of a head resting on her knee, the comfort of not being the only heartbeat in the house. It was on the 8th day that the first stranger came looking. A young man on a battered motorbike stopped at the edge of her property, engine idling, and simply stared at the barn for a long moment before Marin stepped outside to see what he wanted. He was maybe in his 20s, with restless eyes and hands that fidgeted on the handlebars like he wasn't sure whether to stay or bolt. "Sorry to bother you," he called, not quite meeting her eyes. "Heard there might be a couple of big dogs out this way. Gray and brown, real big, real strong looking." Marin felt something tighten in her chest, a protective instinct so immediate it surprised her. "Why do you ask?" The young man hesitated, glancing over his shoulder, as if checking whether someone was watching him ask the question. "No reason, just heard talk in town, that's all." He revved the engine, and left before she could ask anything further, the sound fading quickly down the lane, leaving only dust and an uneasy quiet behind him. That night, Ash paced the length of the barn for hours, refusing to settle, his eyes fixed on the door every time the wind rattled it. Rook stayed pressed against Marin's side as she sat up with them, unable to sleep herself, feeling the tension radiating off both animals, like heat from a stove. "What is it?" she whispered, running her hand along Ash's neck. "What are you so afraid of?" Ash looked at her, and for a moment, Marin could have sworn there was something almost human in his expression, something close to grief, or maybe warning. Whatever answer he might have given her stayed locked behind those golden eyes, but she understood, without needing words, that whatever had happened to these two dogs before they arrived at her gate was far from finished. Somewhere out there, someone was still looking for them, and judging by the way Ash and Rook reacted to even the smallest hint of a stranger, that someone was not coming with good intentions. Marin did not sleep at all that night. She sat on the barn floor between the two dogs, one hand resting on each of their backs, feeling their heartbeats slow gradually into something closer to rest as the hours passed. She did not know yet who was searching for Ash and Rook, or why the mere mention of them on a stranger's lips could send both animals into such a state of alarm. She only knew, with a certainty she couldn't explain, that her quiet, solitary life had just become something else entirely, and there was no going back to the way things were before the storm brought them to her gate. By the time the sun rose again, pale and gold across the wet fields, Marin had made a silent promise to herself. Whatever storm was coming for Ash and Rook, whoever wanted them back, would have to go through her first. She did not yet understand the size of the world she was stepping into, the history behind those scarred flanks and torn collar, or the man whose name would soon turn her peaceful countryside into something far more dangerous. All she knew was that these two dogs had chosen her doorstep, out of every gate in every corner of the land, and she intended to honor that choice with everything she had. The days that followed carried a strange, charged quiet, the kind that settles over a house right before a great change arrives, though neither Maren nor the animals sleeping in her barn could yet name what that change would be. Word continued to spread through the small town near Maren's farm, carried on the tongues of shopkeepers and neighbors who loved little more than a fresh mystery to chew over. The bakery owner, a cheerful woman named Grace Hollow, mentioned to Maren one morning that she'd heard whispers of a hunter from the northern hills, a man once famous for training dogs so fierce and so loyal that people paid enormous sums just to see them perform. They say he vanished years back, Grace said, wrapping a loaf of bread in paper. Something happened out there in the hills, some kind of terrible falling out, and no one's heard from him since. Folks always figured his animals died with whatever happened to him. Maren felt a chill crawl up her spine at those words, though she kept her face calm as she paid for the bread and thanked Grace for the information. She walked home, along the familiar dirt road, her mind spinning through every strange detail of the past week, piecing together a story that felt too large and too dangerous for her small, quiet life. When she reached the farm, Ash and Rook were waiting at the fence, as they always did now, tails low, eyes scanning the road behind her for any sign of a threat. She knelt down and let them press against her, feeling their warmth seep into her hands, still cold from the walk. "There's a story about you two," she murmured. "A big one. I think I need to hear the rest of it." Neither dog could answer her question directly, but as the days passed, she began to notice something new in their behavior, a growing tension that seemed to stretch tighter every time a vehicle passed on the distant road, every time a stranger's voice carried across the fields. It was as if some part of them knew that whoever had once controlled their lives was drawing closer, step by careful step, and that soon, Maren's quiet farmhouse would no longer be a place of safety, but a battleground for something neither of them had chosen but could not escape. For now, though, she allowed herself one more evening of peace, sitting between Ash and Rook on the porch as the sun sank low behind the hills, unaware that this peace was the last she would know before the true storm arrived at her door. 3 weeks passed since the storm brought Ash and Rook to Maren's gate, and in that time, the farmhouse had transformed from a quiet, lonely place into something that finally felt like a home again. Maren woke each morning to the sound of paws on wooden floorboards, to 2 pairs of eyes, watching her, with a devotion she had never known from another living creature. She had grown so used to their presence that the silence of her old life now felt like a distant memory, something she could barely remember choosing to live inside. The dogs had healed remarkably well. Their ribs no longer showed through their coats, and their fur had regained a deep, healthy shine, gray for Ash and a rich chestnut brown for Rook. Their strength had returned too, evident in the powerful way they moved across the pasture, effortless and controlled, like animals built for something far greater than chasing rabbits or guarding a modest farm. Maren often found herself standing at the fence, simply watching them run, marveling at how such creatures had ended up choosing her, of all people, to protect. But their healing bodies did not erase what remained hidden beneath the surface. Ash still startled at sudden noises, his ears snapping upright at the smallest unfamiliar sound. Rook still refused to sleep unless positioned where she could see both the door and Maren at the same time, as if some deep instinct told her that danger might slip through unnoticed if she allowed herself even a moment of full rest. One afternoon, while Maren hung laundry on the line behind her house, a car she did not recognize rolled slowly down the lane, kicking up a trail of dust behind it. Ash was at her side instantly, a low sound rumbling in his chest, not quite a growl, but a clear warning nonetheless. Rook positioned herself just behind Maren's legs, ears flattened, eyes locked on the approaching vehicle. The car stopped at the edge of her property, and a well-dressed man stepped out, his shoes far too polished for the muddy countryside roads. He wore a long gray coat despite the mild weather, and his eyes moved across the farm with a calculating sharpness that made Maren's stomach tighten before he even spoke a word. "Afternoon," he said, his voice smooth, almost rehearsed. "I'm sorry to intrude. I'm looking for information about a pair of dogs that may have wandered through this area recently. Large animals, gray and brown, quite distinctive." Maren kept her hands steady as she pinned another shirt to the line, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Lots of dogs wander through the countryside," she said carefully. "Can't say I've noticed anything unusual." The man's gaze flicked toward Ash and Rook, both standing rigid beside her, and something shifted in his expression. a flash of recognition quickly smoothed over. "These are fine-looking animals," he said, nodding toward them. "Very fine indeed. Where did you happen to acquire them?" "They're not for sale," Marin said, her voice firmer now, surprising even herself with the edge in it. "And I'd appreciate it if you'd leave my property." The man studied her for a long moment, and Marin felt the full weight of his attention, like being assessed by someone who was used to getting exactly what he wanted through patience rather than force. Finally, he offered a thin smile and returned to his car. "Of course. My apologies for the intrusion. I'm sure we'll speak again soon." He drove away slowly, deliberately, and Marin watched until the dust settled completely, before she allowed herself to breathe normally again. Ash remained tense long after the car disappeared from sight, his eyes fixed on the empty road, as if expecting it to return at any moment. That night, Marin sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea, slowly growing cold in her hands, turning the strange visit over in her mind. She thought about Grace Hollow's story of the vanished hunter, about the way Ash and Rook reacted to any mention of strangers searching for them, and about the calculating look in that well-dressed man's eyes. None of it added up to anything comforting. She decided, finally, that she needed more information than town gossip could provide. The following morning, she drove into the nearby city, leaving Ash and Rook secured safely in the barn, and visited the small local library tucked between a hardware store and a shuttered bank. The librarian, a soft-spoken woman named Nora Finch, greeted her warmly and asked what she was researching. "I'm trying to find information about a hunter," Marin said, keeping her voice casual. "Someone who might have trained dogs professionally, maybe 10 or so years back. Northern Hills area." Nora's expression shifted slightly, curiosity mixing with something more cautious. "That would be Callum Bray, I imagine. There was quite a bit written about him at one point, before everything went quiet." She led Marin to an archive of old newspapers, carefully preserved on microfilm, and helped her find the relevant articles. The stories painted a vivid picture of a man once celebrated across the region for his extraordinary skill in raising and training hunting dogs, animals so disciplined and loyal that wealthy patrons traveled great distances to witness them work. Photographs showed a younger Callum standing proudly beside a pack of dogs, his expression confident, almost triumphant, nothing like the desperate energy Marin imagined might now surround whoever was searching for Ash and Rook. Then, abruptly, the article stopped. The final piece, dated nearly a decade earlier, mentioned only briefly that Callum Bray had disappeared following what the reporter vaguely described as a serious incident involving his kennel, with no further details provided. No follow-up stories existed. No explanation. Just silence, as if the man and his legendary dogs had simply been erased from public memory. Marin thanked Nora and left the library with more questions than answers, her mind spinning with possibilities. If Callum Bray truly was still alive, and if Ash and Rook truly were his missing dogs, then somebody out there wanted them back badly enough to send a stranger creeping around her property, asking careful questions with careful words. She drove home with the windows down, letting the cool air clear her thoughts, and found Ash and Rook waiting anxiously at the barn door the moment she arrived. They pressed against her almost immediately, as if her absence, even for a few hours, had stretched their nerves to the breaking point.
"I think I know who you belong to," she whispered, kneeling to wrap her arms around both of their necks at once. "Or who you used to belong to, anyway."
"I don't know the whole story yet, but I promise you both, I'm not letting anyone take you from here unless you want to go." That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and violet, Marin noticed something she had not seen before. A thin, faded scar ran along the inside of Ash's front leg, mostly hidden beneath his thick fur, the kind of mark that came from something sharp and deliberate rather than an accident of nature. She traced her fingers gently along it, and Ash allowed the touch without flinching, watching her with those steady golden eyes. "Someone hurt you," she said quietly. "Badly, I think, and I don't think it was an accident." Rook let out a soft whine from where she lay curled nearby, and Marin felt the weight of unspoken history pressing down on the peaceful evening. Whatever had happened to these two dogs, whatever tragedy had separated them from the man who once trained them with such evident pride, it had left scars far deeper than the ones visible on their skin. The following days brought no further visits from strangers, though the quiet felt more like held breath than true peace. Marin found herself checking the road more often than usual, glancing up from her gardening at every distant engine sound, every shift in the wind that carried unfamiliar scents toward the farm. Ash and Rook mirrored her vigilance perfectly, never straying far, always positioning themselves between her and the wider world beyond the fence line. One evening, while repairing a loose board on the barn door, Marin heard Rook let out a sharp bark, different from her usual sounds, urgent and pointed. She turned quickly and found both dogs staring intently toward the tree line at the edge of her property, hackles raised, bodies rigid with tension. "What is it?" she asked, scanning the shadows beneath the trees, but seeing nothing obvious. A moment later, a figure stepped out from between the trees, tall and lean, moving with the careful, deliberate steps of someone used to tracking through unfamiliar terrain without being seen. Marin's breath caught in her throat as the figure drew closer, close enough for the fading light to reveal a face marked by years of hardship, eyes that carried a haunted weight she recognized instantly from the old newspaper photographs. It was him, Callum Bray, older now, thinner, his once confident expression replaced by something far more desperate, standing at the edge of her land, with his eyes fixed entirely on the two dogs pressed protectively against her sides. "Please," he said, his voice rough, cracked from disuse, or emotion, or both. "I need to speak with you. It's about my dogs." Marin's hand found its way instinctively to Ash's back, fingers curling into his fur as she stood her ground at the edge of her porch. The man in front of her, the same one from the old newspaper photographs, looked nothing like the confident figure captured in those faded images. His clothes were worn thin, his boots caked with mud from what must have been days of walking, and his eyes held a kind of exhaustion that went far deeper than physical tiredness. "You're Callum Bray," she said, not quite a question. He nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving the two dogs at her side. "And you must be the woman who's been keeping them safe. I owe you more thanks than I can properly express. But I need you to understand something. Those dogs, Ash and Rook, they're mine. I raised them from pups. But I trained them myself, every command, every instinct they carry. Whatever trouble they've caused you, whatever danger they may have brought to your door, it's not their fault, it's mine." Marin studied him carefully, weighing his words against the desperate energy radiating off him. "If they're yours, why did they run from you? Why were they half-starved and covered in wounds when they showed up at my gate in the middle of a storm?" Something flickered across Callum's face, pain mixed with something closer to shame. "It's a long story, longer than I have the strength to explain standing out here in the open, but I promise you, I never meant for any of this to happen. I thought they were gone. I thought I'd lost them forever, along with everything else that night." Ash let out a low sound, somewhere between a whine and a growl, and pressed himself firmly against Marin's leg, refusing to move any closer to the man who claimed to be his former owner. Rook mirrored the behavior exactly, her body rigid, ears flattened, clearly uncomfortable despite whatever history might have existed between them. Callum's shoulders sagged slightly at the sight, a flash of hurt crossing his weathered face. "I understand. If they don't trust me anymore, I understand if you don't either. But please, just give me a chance to explain what happened. I've been searching for these two for years, and I never imagined I'd actually find them alive." Marin hesitated, torn between her instinct to protect the animals who had come to depend on her, and a growing curiosity about the truth behind their scars, their fear, and the desperate man now standing at the edge of her property. Finally, she gestured toward the porch steps. "You can sit, talk, but you don't come any closer to them until they decide they're ready. Understand?" Callum nodded gratefully and lowered himself onto the wooden steps, keeping a respectful distance from both Marin and the dogs. He rubbed a hand across his tired face before beginning, his voice low and heavy, with memories he clearly hadn't spoken aloud in a very long time. "I used to run a kennel up in the northern hills," he said. "Best hunting dogs in the region, or so people like to say. I trained them not just to hunt, but to think, to protect, to understand loyalty in ways most people don't even understand themselves. Ash and Rook were the finest pair I ever raised. Smarter than most people I've met, honestly." He paused, glancing toward the dogs, who watched him with wary, unreadable expressions. "About 10 years back, I had a partner in the business, a man named Victor Kane. We built the kennel together, trained dogs together, made good money selling and training animals for wealthy clients across the region. But Victor wanted more than an honest business could provide. He started taking on clients I didn't approve of. People involved in things far more dangerous than simple hunting or guarding livestock. Marin felt a chill settle over her despite the mild evening air. What kind of things? Callum's jaw tightened. Illegal things. Smuggling operations that use trained dogs to track and intimidate, rather than simply hunt game. I refused to be part of it. Told him I wanted nothing to do with using these animals, for something so far removed from what I'd built them for. We argued. Badly. And one night, while I was away collecting supplies, Victor's men came to the kennel. His voice cracked slightly, and he took a moment before continuing. I came home to find most of my dogs gone, sold off or worse, and the two I loved most, Ash and Rook, simply vanished. I searched for months, following rumors, chasing false leads across half the region, but eventually, I had to accept they were likely dead, killed either by Victor's men or by whoever he'd sold them to. But they weren't dead, Marin said quietly. No, Callum agreed, his eyes finally softening as he looked toward the dogs. Somehow, they survived. Somehow, they found their way here, to you. I don't know the full story of what happened between then and now, but I intend to find out, and I intend to make things right, for them and for myself. Ash shifted slightly at these words, his golden eyes studying Callum with an intensity that suggested some flicker of recognition beneath the wariness. Rook remained still, though her ears twitched forward slightly, no longer completely flattened against her skull. Marin considered everything Callum had shared, turning the pieces over carefully in her mind. The story lined up disturbingly well with the newspaper articles she'd read, with the scars she'd found on Ash's leg, with the constant vigilance both dogs displayed toward any hint of a stranger approaching. Still, something in her hesitated to simply hand over trust so easily. If what you're saying is true, she said slowly, then why did that man come here a few days ago, asking about dogs matching this description? Dressed nicely, driving an expensive car, asking careful questions like he already suspected the answer? Callum's expression darkened considerably. Describe him to me. Marin did her best, recalling the smooth voice, the calculating eyes, the long gray coat, despite the mild weather. As she spoke, Callum's face grew increasingly grim, until finally, he let out a slow, heavy breath. That sounds like one of Victor's men, probably sent to confirm whether the rumors about surviving dogs in this area held any truth. If Victor knows Ash and Rook are alive, he'll want them back, not out of any affection, but because dogs trained the way I trained them are valuable tools for the kind of work he's involved in now. And if he believes they might carry any knowledge of what happened that night, any evidence of what he did, he'll see them as a threat that needs to be eliminated, rather than simply reclaimed. A cold weight settled in Marin's stomach at these words. Are you saying my farm, my home, might be in danger because of them? Callum met her eyes directly, his expression somber but honest. I'm saying I never meant to bring this trouble to your doorstep, and I'm deeply sorry that I have. But yes, if Victor believes Ash and Rook are here, it's only a matter of time before he sends more than a single man asking careful questions. I need you to understand the seriousness of what we're dealing with. Marin looked down at Ash and Rook, both still pressed protectively against her legs, and felt a fierce, unexpected surge of determination rise within her chest. These two animals had chosen her gate out of every possible refuge in the storm. They had trusted her enough to heal, to rest, to finally feel safe again, after whatever horrors they had survived. She was not about to abandon that trust now, regardless of the danger that history seemed determined to drag back into her quiet life. Then we need a plan, she said firmly, because I'm not letting anyone take them, and I'm not letting anyone hurt them either, not after everything they've already survived. Callum studied her for a long moment, something like respect flickering behind his tired eyes. You barely know me, and you barely know the danger involved, yet you're still willing to stand against a man like Victor Kane, for the sake of two dogs that aren't even yours. They chose me, Marin said simply. That's enough. A faint, weary smile crossed Callum's face, the first genuine expression of warmth she'd seen from him since his arrival. Then perhaps, between the three of us, along with Ash and Rook, we actually stand a chance of making things right. As twilight deepened over the quiet countryside, casting long shadows across the fields Marin had called home for the past 3 years, she felt the shape of her future shifting dramatically, pulling her away from solitude and directly into a fight she had never asked for, yet somehow felt entirely prepared to face. Ash finally took a single, cautious step toward Callum, sniffing carefully at the air between them, memory and wariness warring visibly behind his golden eyes, while Rook remained close to Marin, watching the unfolding reunion with careful, measured patience. Whatever happened next, whatever danger Victor Kane intended to bring toward her peaceful farm, Marin understood with sudden clarity that there was no turning back now. The storm that had delivered Ash and Rook to her gate had only been the beginning. The days following Callum's arrival carried a tension that settled over Marin's farm like a fog that refused to lift. He had taken to sleeping in a small tent near the tree line, insisting he didn't want to intrude on her home, though Marin suspected the real reason was his need to keep watch over the road leading toward her property. Every morning, she found him already awake, scanning the horizon with the same careful vigilance she now recognized in Ash and Rook. Ash, in particular, seemed to be softening toward his old owner, in small, cautious increments. He would sit near Callum during the evenings, not quite close enough to touch, but close enough to listen when the man spoke quietly about the years they'd spent together, before everything fell apart. Rook remained more guarded, though even she had begun accepting small pieces of food directly from Callum's hand, a gesture that seemed to mean more to him than Marin initially understood. She used to do that as a pup, Callum explained one evening, watching Rook carefully sniff at his palm before finally taking the offered piece of dried meat. Wouldn't eat unless she trusted the person feeding her completely. Guess some things don't change, even after everything. Marin sat across from him near the small fire pit she'd built between the house and the barn, the flames casting flickering shadows across the yard. You said Victor Kane trained dogs too, before things went wrong between you. What kind of man is he, really? I need to understand what we're dealing with, if he does come looking. Callum's expression grew distant, remembering. Charming. On the surface. The kind of man who could convince you the sky was green if he wanted to badly enough. But underneath that charm, there's nothing but calculation. Every relationship, every deal, every decision he makes serves some larger purpose, usually his own gain. I trusted him for years before I understood that. And now? What does he actually do? Now he runs an operation that moves goods and information across several regions, using trained animals to track, intimidate, and sometimes retrieve things his clients want kept quiet. It's dangerous work, the kind that leaves people disappearing if they cause enough trouble. If he believes Ash and Rook witnessed anything that night, anything that could expose what really happened or who else was involved, he won't rest until they're either back under his control or eliminated entirely. The word eliminated hung heavy in the cool evening air, and Marin felt Rook press closer against her side, as if the dog understood the weight of the conversation, despite lacking the words to follow it precisely. We need to be smarter than reactive, Marin said finally. If his man already came here once, asking questions, he'll likely come back, or send someone else. We should be prepared before that happens, not scrambling to figure out what to do in the moment. Callum nodded slowly, a flicker of the confident trainer he must have once been surfacing behind his tired eyes. Agreed. I've been thinking about reinforcing the property, setting up ways to know the moment anyone approaches without them realizing we're aware. Ash and Rook already do this naturally, but we can build on their instincts, give ourselves an actual advantage instead of just relying on luck. Over the following days, the three of them worked together in a rhythm that surprised Marin with how naturally it developed. Callum showed her subtle signals Ash and Rook had been trained to respond to, quiet whistles and hand gestures that meant different things, depending on context, allowing silent communication in situations where speaking aloud might give away their position. Marin found herself picking up the signals quickly, a part of her recognizing that this knowledge might soon become essential, rather than simply interesting. They also worked on reinforcing weak points around the property, checking the fence lines for gaps, ensuring the barn doors could be secured quickly if needed, and identifying the best vantage points from which someone could watch the approaching road without being seen themselves. Edwin Marsh, noticing the sudden activity from his own property down the lane, wandered over one afternoon with obvious curiosity written across his weathered face. "Didn't expect you to have company," he said, eyeing Callum with open suspicion. "Especially not company that looks like he's been sleeping in ditches for the better part of a decade." "This is Callum," Marin said simply, deciding honesty was probably the safer path given how quickly gossip traveled through the area anyway. "He's the original owner of Ash and Rook." There's some trouble that might be following them, and we're trying to prepare for it. Edwin's expression shifted from suspicion to genuine concern. What kind of trouble are we talking about exactly? Callum stepped forward, extending a hand that Edwin shook cautiously. The kind that involves dangerous men who won't hesitate to cause harm if they believe it serves their purposes. I don't want to put anyone else at risk, but if strangers start appearing around this area asking unusual questions, I'd consider it a great favor if you'd let us know. Edwin studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. Been farming this land my whole life. Seen my share of trouble come through these parts over the years. You let me know what to watch for, and I'll keep my eyes open. Folks around here look out for each other, especially when it comes to protecting someone as stubborn and kind-hearted as Marin. Marin felt a warm rush of gratitude at Edwin's words, realizing that despite her years of relative isolation, she had somehow built a quiet network of people who genuinely cared about her well-being. It gave her a small measure of comfort against the growing shadow of danger that seemed to be creeping steadily closer with each passing day. That night, as Marin prepared for bed, Ash appeared at her doorway, something he hadn't done since Callum's arrival, having spent most evenings near the tent by the tree line instead. He nudged her hand gently with his nose, golden eyes searching her face with an expression she was beginning to understand as deep, unwavering loyalty. "You're staying with me tonight?" she asked softly, and Ash simply circled once before settling onto the floor beside her bed, exactly as he had done every night before Callum's return. Rook joined him a moment later, curling against his side, and Marin felt a fierce warmth spread through her chest at the sight. Whatever bond these two dogs had once shared with Callum, whatever history connected them across years of separation and survival, it was clear they had also formed something entirely new with her, something neither time nor a returning owner could simply erase. She fell asleep that night, comforted by their steady breathing, unaware that morning would bring the first true test of everything they had been quietly preparing for. The sound of an engine cutting through the pre-dawn quiet jolted Marin awake before the sun had fully risen. Ash was already on his feet, a low growl building in his throat, and Rook stood rigid beside him, both animals staring intently toward the window that faced the main road. Marin scrambled out of bed, pulling on clothes quickly as she moved toward the door, finding Callum already awake and alert near the tree line, his eyes fixed on a set of headlights approaching slowly down the lane. The vehicle was unfamiliar, larger than the sleek car from before, moving with a deliberate, unhurried pace that felt far more threatening than if it had simply sped past. "Get inside!" Callum called quietly, moving toward her position with practiced calm, despite the tension radiating from every line of his body. "Whatever happens, stay close to the dogs, and stay ready to move if I tell you to." Marin's heart pounded as she watched the vehicle come to a stop at the edge of her property, exactly where the well-dressed stranger had parked days before. This time, however, two men stepped out instead of one, both moving with the same calculated confidence, both wearing expressions that made it clear they hadn't come simply to ask polite questions. Ash's growl deepened into something far more serious, and Rook's entire body coiled with tension beside him, both animals positioning themselves protectively between Marin and the approaching threat. Whatever quiet preparations they had made over the past several days, whatever careful plans they had discussed around the evening fire, none of it felt quite adequate now that the actual danger stood only yards away, watching them with cold, patient eyes. The two men approached the fence line slowly, deliberately, the kind of pace meant to communicate control rather than caution. Marin recognized neither of them, though something about their posture, the careful way their eyes swept across the property, assessing every possible exit and hiding place, told her they were far more dangerous than the smooth-talking stranger who had visited before. Callum stepped forward first, positioning himself between the newcomers and the house, his voice carrying a firmness Marin hadn't heard from him until this moment. "This is private property. You need to leave." The taller of the two men smiled thinly, though the expression never reached his eyes. "Callum Bray, we heard rumors you were still alive, though I admit I didn't fully believe it until now. Victor sends his regards." "I'm sure he does," Callum replied, his tone flat and controlled. "Tell him whatever business we had ended years ago, and it stays ended." The shorter man's gaze drifted toward Ash and Rook, both animals standing rigid at Marin's sides, muscles coiled with barely restrained tension. "Those are fine-looking dogs. Victor's been wanting a proper reunion with them for quite some time now. Be ashamed to make this difficult when it doesn't need to be." Marin felt her pulse quicken as she watched the exchange, understanding without needing further explanation that these men had come with clear intentions, ones that had nothing to do with polite negotiation. Ash's growl deepened, a warning rumble that seemed to carry weight far beyond simple animal instinct, and Rook mirrored the sound perfectly, both dogs clearly prepared to defend their small, fragile pack against whatever threat these strangers represented. "They're not going anywhere," Marin said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice, despite the fear coursing through her veins. "And neither is Callum. You can tell Victor Kane that whatever he's looking for, he won't find it here." The taller man's eyes shifted toward her for the first time, studying her with an unsettling patience. "And you would be the woman who's been harboring them. Brave of you, considering you have no idea what you've actually gotten yourself involved in." "I know enough," Marin shot back, refusing to let her voice waver, despite the cold dread pooling in her stomach. A tense silence stretched between them, broken only by the low, steady growl still rumbling from both dogs. Finally, the shorter man glanced toward his companion, exchanging a look that seemed to communicate some unspoken decision. "We'll be back," he said, turning slowly toward the vehicle. "With more than just the two of us next time. Victor doesn't like loose ends, and right now, you represent quite a significant one." They climbed back into their vehicle without another word, reversing slowly down the lane, before disappearing around the bend, leaving behind a heavy, unsettled quiet that seemed to press down on the entire farm. Marin released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, her legs suddenly weak beneath her. Callum turned to face her immediately, concern etched across his tired features. "Are you all right?" "I think so," she said, though her voice trembled slightly. That was more frightening than I expected, even after everything you told me." "I'm sorry," Callum said, and the weight of genuine regret in his voice was unmistakable. "I never wanted this danger to reach you. If I had realized sooner that Ash and Rook had survived, that they might lead trouble directly to whoever took them in, I would have found another way to search for them, one that didn't put an innocent person at risk." Marin shook her head firmly. "It's not your fault Victor Kane is a dangerous man, and it's certainly not the fault of these two dogs for surviving whatever happened to them. If anything, I'm grateful they found their way to me, difficult as things have become. I'd rather face this danger with them by my side than have spent these past weeks in the same lonely silence as before." Ash pressed against her leg gently, as if understanding the sentiment behind her words, and Rook let out a soft sound that Marin had come to recognize as her particular expression of comfort and reassurance. Despite the fear still coursing through her, she felt a fierce determination solidifying within her chest, a refusal to simply hand over the small, unexpected family she had built over the past several weeks. "We need to prepare properly now," Callum said, his expression sharpening with purpose. "They know where we are, and they'll be back with reinforcements. We can't simply wait around hoping they change their minds." Over the following 2 days, the farm transformed into something resembling a fortress, though one carefully disguised to avoid drawing unnecessary attention from the wider community. Callum worked tirelessly, reinforcing the barn doors, setting up simple but effective ways to monitor the road without being seen, and drilling Marin on the silent signals Ash and Rook had been trained to respond to since puppyhood. Edwin Marsh, true to his word, kept careful watch from his own property, occasionally wandering over with updates about unfamiliar vehicles spotted passing through the wider area, or strangers asking careful questions in town about a woman living alone with 2 large dogs. Grace Hollow, too, proved unexpectedly helpful, passing along whispers she overheard from customers about men matching the description of Victor's associates, making inquiries at the local inn. "They're definitely still around," Grace warned Marin during a quiet visit to the bakery, "asking questions about the roads leading out to your farm, about who else lives nearby, about whether you have any family who might come looking if something happened to you." The implication behind those questions sent a fresh wave of fear through Marin's chest, though she forced herself to remain outwardly calm, thanking Grace for the warning before returning home to share the information with Callum. His expression grew grim as she relayed the details, confirming his worst suspicions about the seriousness of Victor's intentions. "He's planning something more organized," Callum said, pacing the length of the kitchen, while Ash and Rook watched from their positions near the door. "Not just a quick attempt to grab the dogs and leave, but something calculated, designed to remove any obstacles standing in his way, permanently if necessary." Marin felt a chill at the word permanently, understanding the full weight of what he was suggesting. What do we do? Callum stopped pacing, turning to face her with an expression that mixed determination with genuine concern for her safety. We need more information about what Victor actually knows, and about what evidence he believes Ash and Rook might carry from that night years ago. If we can figure out what he's truly afraid of, we might find a way to turn this situation in our favor, rather than simply waiting to be overwhelmed. How do we find that information, without walking directly into danger? Callum's gaze drifted toward Ash, studying the dog, with an expression that carried both affection and calculated assessment. Ash was there the night everything fell apart. He witnessed whatever happened between Victor and the men he was working with. Dogs remember more than people give them credit for, and if there's a way to understand what specifically frightened Victor enough to want them eliminated, rather than simply reclaimed, Ash might be the key to figuring that out. Marin knelt down beside Ash, running her hand gently along his back, feeling the tension still coiled beneath his fur, despite the days that had passed since the men's threatening visit. "What did you see that night?" she whispered, though she knew he couldn't answer in words. "What are you carrying that scares a man like Victor Kane so badly?" Ash met her eyes steadily, and for a moment, Marin felt certain that whatever memory lived behind that steady golden gaze held the key to understanding everything that had led to this dangerous, uncertain moment. Whatever the truth turned out to be, she understood with growing clarity that uncovering it would soon become essential, not just for her own safety, but for finally putting an end to the fear that had haunted Ash and Rook since long before the storm delivered them to her gate. That evening, as the sun sank behind the distant hills, Callum sat with Marin at the kitchen table, a worn notebook spread open between them, filled with names and dates he had gathered over years of quiet investigation into what truly happened the night his kennel was destroyed. His handwriting grew shakier in certain entries, evidence of the emotional toll such research must have taken during his years of searching. "I always suspected there was more to that night than a simple business dispute," Callum explained, tracing a finger along one particular page. "Victor didn't just want the dogs gone because I refused to cooperate with his new clients. Something happened that night that scared him badly, something involving one of the men he was working with." "What kind of men?" Marin asked, leaning closer to examine the notes. "Powerful ones. Men connected to operations far larger and more dangerous than simple smuggling. I believe one of Victor's new partners, a man I only know by the name Henry Voss, was involved in something that went badly wrong that night, something Ash may have witnessed directly." Marin felt a fresh chill at the mention of another dangerous name entering their already complicated situation. What could a dog possibly witness that would matter years later? Callum's expression grew distant, remembering. There were rumors, back before everything fell apart, that Victor's new clients were interested in more than simple smuggling routes. Rumors of documents, evidence of corruption reaching into local authorities, evidence that could destroy powerful reputations if it ever surfaced. If something happened that night involving those documents, if Ash somehow witnessed where they were hidden, or what became of them, that would explain why Victor considers eliminating him a much safer option than simply reclaiming him. The weight of this revelation settled heavily over the kitchen table, and Marin found herself studying Ash with fresh eyes, wondering what secrets might be locked behind his steady, watchful gaze. Rook, sensing the tension in the room, moved closer to nuzzle against Callum's hand, a small gesture of comfort that seemed to steady him slightly. "We need to find out exactly what Victor is afraid of," Marin said finally. "If we can uncover whatever evidence he's worried about, we might be able to use it to protect ourselves, rather than simply hiding and waiting for his men to return." Callum nodded slowly, though uncertainty still clouded his expression. "The problem is figuring out where to even begin looking. It's been 10 years. Whatever evidence existed that night could be long gone, destroyed, or hidden somewhere we'd never think to search." Ash rose suddenly from his position near the door, moving with a purposeful energy that immediately drew both their attention. He walked directly to the small pack Callum had carried during his years of searching, nudging at it insistently with his nose, until Callum finally opened it fully, revealing items Marin hadn't yet seen, remnants of the old kennel that Callum had managed to salvage over the years. Among the items was a small weathered collar, different from the one Ash had worn when he first arrived at Marin's gate. Ash pressed his nose against it repeatedly, whining softly, his golden eyes fixed intently on Callum, as if trying desperately to communicate something urgent. "This was Rook's original collar," Callum said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn across his tired features. "The one she wore before the attack. I kept it after everything happened, hoping I might use it someday if I ever found her again." Ash continued nudging at the collar, and Rook moved closer as well, sniffing at it with obvious recognition, before nudging her own nose against a small section near the buckle that seemed slightly thicker than the rest of the leather. Callum's eyes widened as he examined the section more closely, running his fingers carefully along the seam, until he found what appeared to be a small, hidden compartment sewn cleverly into the leather itself. With careful, trembling hands, he worked the compartment open, revealing a tiny, tightly folded piece of paper that had clearly been hidden there for years. "I don't believe it," he whispered, unfolding the fragile paper with the utmost care. "I built these collars myself, with hidden compartments meant for identification purposes, in case the dogs ever became separated from me during a job. I completely forgot about them until just now." Marin leaned forward eagerly as Callum smoothed the paper flat on the table, revealing rows of carefully written numbers and initials, clearly some kind of coded record, rather than simple identification information. "What is it?" Callum studied the paper intently, his expression shifting from confusion to dawning realization. "These look like transaction records, dates, amounts, initials that could correspond to names. If this is what I think it is, this could be exactly the kind of evidence Victor has been desperately searching for all these years. Proof of the corrupt dealings he and his partners were involved in." "Rook was carrying this the whole time," Marin said, wonder coloring her voice, as she looked at the dog now resting calmly beside Callum. "All these years, hidden in her collar, and neither of you knew it was there." Callum nodded slowly, still staring at the paper, as if it might disappear if he looked away for even a moment. "This changes everything. If we can verify what these records actually document, we might have exactly the leverage we need to finally put an end to Victor's threat, not just against us, but against whoever else he's been intimidating and exploiting for the past decade." A renewed sense of purpose settled over the small kitchen, mixing with the underlying tension that had defined the past several weeks. Marin felt a flicker of genuine hope for the first time since Callum's arrival, understanding that they finally possessed something concrete to work with, rather than simply reacting defensively to whatever threat Victor's men decided to bring next. "We need to be extremely careful about how we handle this," Callum warned, carefully refolding the paper and returning it to its hidden compartment for safekeeping. "If Victor learns we have this evidence before we're prepared to use it properly, he'll stop at nothing to retrieve it, and the danger to all of us will increase dramatically." "Then we need a plan," Marin said firmly, echoing words she had spoken days earlier, though now with a clearer sense of what that plan might actually involve. "Somewhere safe to verify what this evidence actually proves, and someone trustworthy who can help us use it properly, if it truly is what you believe it to be." Callum considered this for a long moment before nodding slowly. "There's a retired investigator I knew years ago, a man named Owen Blake, who helped look into corruption cases throughout the region before he retired. If anyone could help us verify this evidence and understand exactly how to use it safely, it would be him." As night settled fully over the farm, casting long shadows across the quiet fields, Marin felt the shape of their situation shifting once again, from simple defense toward something resembling an actual counterattack against the danger that had been steadily closing in around them. Ash and Rook, curled together near the fireplace, seemed to sense the change in atmosphere as well, their earlier tension replaced by something closer to cautious hope. Whatever challenges still lay ahead, whatever risks remained in confronting a man as dangerous and calculating as Victor Kane, Marin understood that they finally possessed a genuine chance at ending this threat permanently, rather than simply surviving one desperate confrontation after another. The road ahead would undoubtedly prove difficult, but for the first time since the storm had delivered Ash and Rook to her gate, she felt something resembling genuine confidence about where that road might eventually lead them. Owen Blake lived nearly 2 hours away, in a small house on the edge of a town Marin had never visited, tucked behind a row of tall pines that offered a natural kind of privacy she imagined the retired investigator appreciated, after decades spent uncovering other people's secrets. Callum had called ahead using a payphone in town, unwilling to risk using any traceable number, and arranged for them to visit the following afternoon. The drive there felt tense despite the pleasant weather, Ash and Rook sitting alert in the back seat of Marin's car, both animals occasionally glancing out the windows as if checking for any vehicle that might be following them. Callum kept watch as well, his eyes constantly scanning the mirrors, his body tense with the particular vigilance of someone who had spent years anticipating danger from every direction. Owen greeted them at his door with the careful, measured demeanor of a man accustomed to sizing up visitors before revealing anything about himself. He was older than Maren expected, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen enough of the world's darker corners to no longer be easily surprised by anything. "Callum Bray," Owen said, studying his old acquaintance carefully. "Been a long time since anyone mentioned that name to me. Figured you'd either disappeared for good, or ended up in far worse circumstances than simply hiding out in the countryside." "It's been a difficult decade," Callum admitted, gesturing toward Maren and the two dogs. "But we may have finally found something that could change things significantly, and I was hoping you might help us understand exactly what we're dealing with." Owen's eyes moved toward Ash and Rook, recognition flickering behind his careful expression. "These would be the dogs I heard rumors about years back, the ones supposedly lost the night your kennel was destroyed." "The very same," Callum confirmed. "And it turns out one of them has been carrying something important this entire time. Something I believe might finally expose exactly what happened that night, and who else was truly involved." They settled into Owen's modest living room, the retired investigator examining the folded paper with a magnifying glass, and careful, practiced attention, while Maren and Callum waited anxiously nearby. Ash and Rook lay quietly at Maren's feet, though their ears remained alert to every sound within the house, a habit that seemed unlikely to fade regardless of how safe their current surroundings might actually be. After several long minutes, Owen finally looked up, his expression grave. "This is exactly what I suspected it might be. Financial records documenting payments between Victor Kane and several individuals holding significant positions of authority throughout the region, including local law enforcement officials and at least one regional administrator. If this evidence is genuine, and I have no reason to doubt that it is, it documents years of corruption serious enough to end multiple careers and result in significant legal consequences for everyone involved." Maren felt her pulse quicken at the confirmation. "So this really is what Victor's been searching for all these years?" "Without question," Owen confirmed. "Men like Victor Kane don't simply worry about losing valuable trained animals. They worry about evidence capable of destroying everything they've built, everyone they've corrupted along the way. If he believed this evidence might still exist, hidden somewhere he couldn't locate, that would absolutely explain the lengths he's apparently willing to go to recover or destroy these two dogs." Callum leaned forward, his expression intense. "What do we do with this information? How do we use it safely, without simply putting ourselves at even greater risk?" Owen set the magnifying glass aside, considering the question carefully. "The safest path forward would be ensuring this evidence reaches the proper authorities through channels Victor cannot intercept or manipulate. I still maintain contacts from my years investigating corruption cases, individuals I trust completely, who could ensure this evidence receives the attention it deserves without word reaching Victor before it's too late for him to interfere." "And if he learns what we're planning before we manage to deliver it safely?" Maren asked, unable to shake the anxious weight that had settled over her chest since the confrontation at her farm. Owen's expression grew somber. "Then the danger to all of you increases significantly. Victor will stop at nothing to prevent this evidence from reaching authorities capable of acting against him. We need to move carefully, quickly, and with absolute discretion." Over the following hour, they worked out a careful plan together, Owen providing contact information for a trusted colleague, still working within regional law enforcement, someone with a reputation for genuine integrity that corruption had never managed to touch. Callum would deliver a copy of the evidence directly, while the original remained safely hidden, protected against the possibility that Victor's men might somehow intercept them before the delivery could be completed. "You should stay here, while Callum handles the delivery," Owen suggested to Maren, his expression kind but firm. "It would be safer for you and the dogs to remain out of Victor's immediate reach until this situation resolves properly." Maren hesitated, torn between the practical wisdom of Owen's suggestion and her fierce reluctance to be separated from Ash and Rook during such a dangerous moment. Both dogs, sensing her hesitation, pressed closer against her legs, clearly unwilling to consider any arrangement that involved separation from her care. "They won't leave my side," Maren said finally, watching Callum's expression shift with understanding rather than argument. "And honestly, After everything we've been through together these past weeks, I'm not sure I'm willing to simply wait here while the two of you face this danger without me. Callum studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly. Then we face it together, all of us, dogs included. If Victor's men do come looking for trouble, I'd rather have Ash and Rook's instincts working alongside us than sitting helplessly out of reach. Owen watched this exchange with quiet approval, though concern remained etched across his weathered features. Very well. But we move carefully, and we move quickly. I'll reach out to my contact this evening, arrange the safest possible location for the exchange, somewhere Victor's influence cannot easily follow. As dusk settled over the small house, casting long shadows through the windows, Maren felt the familiar tension of uncertainty pressing against her chest, mixed now with something closer to determined resolve. Whatever dangers awaited them in the coming days, she understood clearly that turning back was no longer an option, not after uncovering evidence capable of finally ending the threat that had haunted Ash and Rook for years before they ever found their way to her gate. That night, as they prepared to return home under cover of darkness, Owen pulled Callum aside for a private conversation Maren couldn't quite overhear, though she caught fragments carried on the evening breeze, mentions of safe routes and trusted allies scattered throughout the region, who might offer assistance if things went wrong during the coming days. When Callum returned to the car, his expression carried a mixture of grim determination and cautious optimism that hadn't been present when they arrived earlier that afternoon. Owen believes we have a genuine chance at ending this properly, he told Maren, as they drove back through the darkening countryside. Ash and Rook, alert in the back seat, watching the passing shadows with careful, unwavering attention. But we need to remain vigilant every step of the way. Victor won't simply give up once he realizes what we're planning. Maren nodded, gripping the steering wheel with steady, determined hands, despite the anxious flutter still present in her chest. Whatever challenges awaited them in the days ahead, she felt increasingly certain that she, Callum, and the two extraordinary dogs who had chosen to remain fiercely loyal, despite years of separation and hardship, would face them together, united by a bond that circumstance alone could never fully explain, but that felt, somehow, entirely unbreakable. 2 days passed in tense preparation, each hour stretching longer than the last, as Maren, Callum, and the two dogs waited for word from Owen Blake regarding the safest arrangement for delivering the evidence to his trusted contact. During this time, the atmosphere on the farm grew increasingly heavy, every sound from the road sending both Ash and Rook into immediate alertness, every unfamiliar shadow at the edge of the property drawing careful, watchful attention. Edwin Marsh continued his quiet vigilance from his own land, occasionally passing along updates about strangers still lingering in town, asking careful questions that suggested Victor's associates hadn't given up their search, despite the failed confrontation days earlier. Grace Hollow, too, remained a valuable source of information, mentioning one afternoon that she'd overheard two unfamiliar men discussing plans to return to the countryside roads leading toward Maren's property within the coming days. They mentioned bringing more people this time, Grace warned, her expression troubled as she relayed the overheard conversation. Sounded like they meant business, Maren. You need to be careful. Maren thanked her for the warning, though the weight of it settled heavily in her chest as she drove home, turning the information over in her mind. When she shared the update with Callum, his expression grew grim, confirming her worst fears about the seriousness of what they were facing. Victor's growing desperate, he said, pacing the length of the kitchen, while Ash and Rook watched from their usual positions near the door. If he's mobilizing more men, it means he suspects we might have found something significant, or at the very least, he's no longer willing to risk waiting patiently for a simple resolution. Owen finally reached out later that same evening, using the payphone number Callum had provided, arranging for the evidence delivery to take place the following morning, at a location roughly halfway between Maren's farm and Owen's home, a quiet crossroads, where his trusted law enforcement contact could meet them, without drawing unwanted attention from Victor's network of associates. This needs to go smoothly, Callum said, reviewing the plan carefully with Maren later that night. We arrive early, complete the exchange quickly, and return home before anyone realizes what's happened. Owen assures me his contact is completely trustworthy, someone corruption has never managed to reach. Maren nodded, though anxiety continued gnawing at her chest despite the careful planning. And if Victor's men are watching the roads, waiting for us to make exactly this kind of move, Then we'll need to be smarter than they expect, Callum replied, determination hardening his tired features. We leave before sunrise, take the back roads Edwin mentioned, the ones most people don't bother using since the main route was paved years ago. It'll take longer, but it should keep us out of sight from anyone watching the more obvious paths. That night, sleep proved nearly impossible for Maren, her mind racing through every possible complication that might arise during the following day's careful plan. Ash and Rook remained close beside her bed throughout the restless hours, their steady presence offering the only genuine comfort against the anxious uncertainty pressing down on her chest. They left before dawn, the sky still deep violet with the last remnants of night. Ash and Rook settled quietly in the back seat, while Callum navigated the unfamiliar back roads with careful precision. The world outside felt eerily peaceful, mist rising softly from the fields they passed, birds beginning their earliest songs as the horizon slowly brightened toward morning. Despite the outward calm, tension remained thick within the car, every set of headlights in the distance, drawing immediate, careful attention from both Callum and the two alert dogs. When they finally reached the designated crossroads, a modest, unmarked sedan was already waiting, a woman in plain clothing standing beside it, with the quiet, watchful demeanor of someone accustomed to operating carefully within dangerous circumstances. Detective Ellen Frost, she introduced herself as they approached, her handshake firm and confident. Owen speaks highly of your situation. I understand you have evidence that could significantly impact an ongoing pattern of corruption I've been quietly investigating for some time now. Callum handed over the carefully prepared documentation, along with a detailed account of everything he knew about Victor Kane's operations and the events surrounding the destruction of his kennel years earlier. Detective Frost listened intently, occasionally asking sharp, precise questions that revealed a depth of prior investigation Maren hadn't fully anticipated. This confirms suspicions I've held for years, she said finally, carefully securing the documents within a protective folder. Victor Kane has managed to avoid serious consequences for far too long, largely due to the very corruption this evidence exposes. With this in hand, alongside evidence I've already gathered independently, I believe we finally have enough to move against him and his associates properly. Relief washed through Maren's chest at these words, though it remained tempered by the knowledge that danger hadn't fully passed, simply because the evidence had changed hands. What happens now? Will he come after us once he realizes what's happened? Detective Frost's expression grew serious. It's likely he'll grow increasingly desperate once official proceedings begin against him. I'd recommend remaining extremely cautious over the coming days, perhaps even considering temporary relocation, until arrests can be properly coordinated. Victor Kane is not a man who accepts defeat gracefully, and cornered men often become significantly more dangerous rather than less. As they drove back toward the farm along the same careful back roads, Callum's expression remained tense, despite the successful delivery of the evidence. She's right, he said quietly. This isn't over yet, not until Victor is actually stopped. If anything, the coming days might prove even more dangerous than what we've faced so far. Maren glanced toward the back seat, where Ash and Rook remained alert despite the early hour, their steady presence a constant reminder of everything they had already survived together. Then we prepare for whatever comes next, she said firmly. We've come this far. I'm not about to let fear stop us from finishing what we started. Callum offered her a tired but genuine smile, gratitude, and something warmer flickering behind his exhausted eyes. You've shown remarkable courage through all of this, Maren. Far more than I ever expected from someone who simply found 2 stray dogs at her gate during a storm. They weren't just strays, Maren replied softly, reaching back to rest a hand gently on Ash's head as he leaned forward between the seats. They were exactly what I didn't know I needed. And I intend to make sure they finally get the peaceful life they deserve, regardless of what Victor Kane decides to throw at us next. The farm came into view as the sun climbed fully above the horizon, casting warm golden light across the familiar fields that had become so much more than simply a quiet, solitary refuge over these past several weeks. Whatever challenges still remained ahead, whatever final confrontation Victor's desperation might yet bring toward their doorstep, Maren felt increasingly certain that together, with Callum, with Ash and Rook, and with the unexpected network of allies who had rallied around them, they possessed exactly what was needed to finally bring this dangerous chapter to a close. 3 days passed in uneasy quiet, following the successful delivery of evidence to Detective Frost, though the peace felt fragile, like held breath waiting for the moment it would finally break. Marin continued her daily routines, tending the garden, caring for Ash and Rook, though every task now carried an undercurrent of watchfulness that hadn't existed before Callum's arrival weeks earlier. Edwin Marsh reported increased activity along the main road leading toward town, unfamiliar vehicles passing through with greater frequency, though nothing yet suggested an immediate, direct threat toward the farm itself. Grace Hollow mentioned that the strangers who had been asking careful questions around town seemed to have grown noticeably more agitated, their inquiries taking on a desperate edge that suggested Victor's network was beginning to sense the danger closing in around their own operations. Something shifted, Callum observed one evening, watching the darkening horizon from the porch steps while Ash paced restlessly nearby. Victor knows something's happening, even if he doesn't yet know exactly what evidence has already reached the proper authorities. That kind of uncertainty makes desperate men significantly more dangerous. Marin felt a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in her chest, though she'd grown accustomed enough to the sensation over recent weeks that it no longer overwhelmed her the way it once might have. Do you think he'll come himself this time, rather than simply sending more of his men? Callum considered the question carefully. It's possible. Men like Victor typically prefer keeping their own hands clean, letting others handle the dangerous work directly. But if he's genuinely desperate, if he believes the evidence against him is already moving through official channels, he might decide a personal appearance is worth the risk if it means recovering Ash and Rook, or ensuring their silence permanently. That night, sleep proved elusive once again, both dogs restless despite their usual positions near Marin's bed, ears constantly turning toward every distant sound carried on the night wind. Around midnight, Rook suddenly rose to her feet, a low, urgent growl building in her throat, her attention fixed intently toward the window facing the main road. Marin sat up immediately, heart pounding as she listened carefully, finally catching the faint, distant sound of multiple engines approaching along the lane, moving with a speed that suggested urgency, rather than the careful, deliberate pace of previous visits. She scrambled out of bed, pulling on clothes quickly, while Ash joined Rook at the window, both animals now fully alert, bodies coiled with tension. Callum appeared in her doorway moments later, his expression grave. They're here. More vehicles than before, moving fast. This is what Detective Frost warned us about. Marin's hands trembled slightly as she followed him toward the front of the house, watching through the window as 3 vehicles pulled to a stop along the road, considerably more men emerging than had come during either of the previous confrontations. Among them, moving with an unmistakable air of authority despite his otherwise unremarkable appearance, stood a man Marin immediately recognized from Callum's grim description. Victor Kane had come himself. "Stay close to me," Callum whispered, positioning himself protectively near Marin, while Ash and Rook took up defensive stances at the door, growls building steadily in both their throats. "Whatever happens, don't let them separate you from the dogs. Together, we're stronger than anything Victor's men can throw at us." Victor approached the fence line with unsettling calm, his expression carrying none of the desperation Marin had expected, instead radiating a cold, calculating confidence that felt far more dangerous than outright aggression might have been. "Callum," he called out, his voice smooth and controlled. "It's been a long time. I must say, I'm impressed you managed to survive all these years, though I can't say the same sentiment extends toward our current situation." Callum stepped forward, positioning himself directly between Victor and the house. "Whatever you think you're here to accomplish, Victor, it's already too late. The evidence you're looking for has already reached authorities, capable of ending your operations permanently." A flicker of something crossed Victor's calm expression, quickly smoothed away, though Marin caught the brief moment of genuine alarm before his composure returned fully. "You're bluffing. There's no possible way you could have found anything from that night, not after all these years." "Rook's collar," Callum said simply. "The hidden compartment. I built those collars myself, Victor. I should have realized sooner exactly what she might have been carrying this entire time." Victor's jaw tightened visibly, and for the first time, genuine anger flashed behind his otherwise controlled expression. "Then you've made a terrible mistake, interfering with matters that were never truly your concern to begin with." "Protecting people from corruption isn't interference," Marin spoke up, surprising herself with the steady defiance in her voice, despite the fear still coursing through her veins. It's exactly what should have happened years ago, before you destroyed an innocent man's life, and nearly killed two loyal, remarkable animals in the process. Victor's attention shifted toward her fully for the first time, his expression calculating as he studied her carefully. Brave words from someone who has no real understanding of the forces she's chosen to interfere with. I could make your life considerably more difficult than you currently realize. Ash's growl deepened dramatically at these words, his entire body coiled with barely restrained tension, and Rook mirrored the response perfectly, both dogs clearly prepared to defend Maren against whatever threat Victor represented. Victor's eyes flickered toward the two animals, something unreadable passing behind his calculating gaze. Those dogs, he said slowly, represent everything I built and everything Callum threw away, out of misplaced loyalty to principles that mean nothing in the real world. I intend to reclaim what's rightfully mine, one way or another, regardless of whatever evidence you believe you've managed to deliver. Before anyone could respond further, the distinctive sound of approaching sirens cut through the tense night air, growing steadily louder, as multiple vehicles turned onto the lane behind Victor's group. Detective Frost's voice carried clearly across the yard moments later, amplified through some kind of vehicle speaker system. Victor Kane, you are under arrest. Remain exactly where you are. Chaos erupted momentarily, as Victor's men scattered toward their vehicles, though the arriving law enforcement officers moved quickly to prevent their escape, surrounding the group with practiced efficiency. Victor himself remained frozen for a long moment, his calculating composure finally cracking as the reality of his situation became undeniable. This isn't over, he hissed toward Callum, even as officers moved to restrain him. You'll regret interfering with matters far beyond your understanding. I don't think so, Callum replied calmly, watching as Victor was finally led toward a waiting vehicle. Some things, Victor, are worth far more than whatever power or profit you built through corruption and cruelty. Loyalty, trust, the kind of bond that survives even years of separation and hardship. Those are things you never understood, and it's exactly why you finally lost. As Victor's vehicle disappeared down the lane, followed closely by law enforcement escorting his remaining associates, Maren finally allowed herself to breathe fully for what felt like the first time in hours. Ash and Rook relaxed gradually beside her, their tension slowly melting away as the immediate danger passed into the custody of Detective Frost's carefully coordinated operation. Detective Frost approached them a few minutes later, her expression carrying quiet satisfaction, despite the seriousness of the night's events. The evidence you provided proved absolutely essential in finally building a case strong enough to move against Victor Kane's entire operation. Corruption charges, along with several other serious offenses, should ensure he faces significant consequences for everything he's done, not just to you and these remarkable dogs, but to countless others he's harmed over the years. Maren felt tears of relief and exhaustion finally spilling down her cheeks as she knelt to wrap her arms around both Ash and Rook, feeling their steady heartbeats beneath her hands, understanding fully now that whatever danger had haunted them since long before their arrival at her gate had finally, truly come to an end. The weeks following Victor Kane's arrest brought a kind of peace to Maren's farm that she had almost forgotten was possible. A quiet, settled calm that felt entirely different from the anxious, watchful silence that had defined her life before the storm delivered Ash and Rook to her gate. Detective Frost visited once more to confirm that Victor and his primary associates now faced serious charges, with enough evidence gathered to ensure lengthy legal consequences for the corruption and cruelty they had inflicted over many years. You should both feel proud of what you accomplished, Detective Frost told Maren and Callum during that final visit, watching Ash and Rook play together in the pasture, with an energy neither dog had displayed since their arrival months earlier. It takes considerable courage to stand against someone as dangerous as Victor Kane, especially when doing so put your own safety directly at risk. Callum had remained at the farm throughout the following weeks, though his presence had shifted gradually from the tense, watchful vigilance of those early days into something calmer, more settled. He had taken to helping Maren with various tasks around the property, repairing fences, tending to the modest garden, and spending long hours simply sitting with Ash and Rook, slowly rebuilding the trust that circumstance had once forced them to abandon. I owe you more than I could ever properly express, he told Maren one quiet evening, the two of them sitting together on the porch while the dogs chased each other playfully across the darkening field. Not just for keeping Ash and Rook safe all those months, but for standing beside me through everything that followed. I never expected to find such genuine courage and kindness in someone I'd only just met. Marin smiled, watching the dog's joyful energy with a warmth that had become an inseparable part of her daily life. They chose me that night, during the storm. I think, in a strange way, they knew exactly what they were doing, bringing the three of us together like this. Callum studied her for a long moment, something warm and genuine flickering behind his eyes. Perhaps you're right. Ash and Rook always did have remarkable instincts, even about matters far beyond simple hunting or guarding. Maybe they sensed something in you that even you didn't fully recognize yet, some capacity for courage and loyalty that matched exactly what they needed most. As autumn deepened into winter, Callum made the decision to remain permanently in the area, rather than returning to whatever solitary, haunted existence he had maintained during his years of searching for his lost dogs. He found modest work helping local farmers with their own animals, his considerable skill with training and understanding creatures like Ash and Rook, quickly earning him a respected reputation throughout the small community that had once regarded him with nothing but rumor and suspicion. Edwin Marsh, who had grown genuinely fond of both Callum and the remarkable story of loyalty that had unfolded on Marin's property, became one of his first regular clients, seeking help training a new set of working dogs for his own farm. Grace Hollow, too, remained a warm and constant presence in their lives, often stopping by with fresh bread and cheerful updates about town gossip that no longer carried any hint of the danger that had once haunted their conversations. Ash and Rook thrived through these changing seasons, their earlier wariness gradually softening into the confident, joyful energy of animals who finally understood, deep in whatever instinctive part of themselves processed such things, that the danger which had shadowed their entire lives had truly passed. They divided their fierce loyalty equally between Marin and Callum now, no longer torn between old bonds and new ones, but rather comfortable in a family that had somehow expanded to include both, without requiring either to be abandoned. One crisp morning, as frost coated the fields in a delicate silver sheen, Marin stood at her kitchen window watching Callum toss a worn rope toy across the yard for Ash and Rook to chase, their joyful barks carrying clearly through the cold morning air. She felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the steaming cup of tea in her hands, a quiet, settled happiness that had grown steadily over the past several months, transforming her once lonely farmhouse into something that finally felt complete. She thought back often to that stormy night when everything had begun, to the two exhausted, battle-scarred dogs collapsed against her gate, refusing every instinct toward self-preservation in favor of simply trusting a stranger's kindness. She thought about the desperate, haunted man who had eventually arrived seeking to reclaim them, only to discover that loyalty, once truly earned, could never be simply demanded back through blood or history alone. Ash and Rook had refused to leave her side throughout every dangerous confrontation, every uncertain night, every moment when simpler, safer choices might have been available to them. In return, Marin had refused to abandon them as well, choosing instead to stand firm against danger, far greater than anything she had ever previously faced in her quiet, solitary existence. Now, watching Callum laugh as Rook triumphantly claimed the rope toy from Ash's gentle attempt at competition, Marin understood fully what that stormy night had truly given her. Not simply two remarkable dogs to care for, though that alone would have been more than enough. Not simply the resolution of a dangerous threat that had once seemed impossible to overcome, but rather an entirely new family, built from unexpected circumstances and forged through genuine loyalty, courage, and shared hardship into something far stronger than any of them could have anticipated when the storm first delivered its unexpected gift to her lonely gate. Callum glanced up toward the window, catching her watching, and offered a warm, genuine smile that Marin returned easily, feeling none of the hesitation or loneliness that had once defined her quiet countryside existence. Ash and Rook, noticing the exchange, bounded toward the porch together, tails wagging with obvious joy, clearly eager to include her in whatever playful moment the crisp winter morning still held in store. Setting aside her tea, Marin stepped outside to join them, the cold air bracing against her skin, the warmth of her unexpected family surrounding her completely. Whatever challenges life might yet bring, she felt certain now that she would never again face them alone, not with Callum by her side, and certainly not with two legendary, loyal hounds who had chosen, against every danger and every demand from their past, to remain steadfastly and unwaveringly by her side, exactly where they belonged.